My name is Adam. I'm not a soldier or a minister or anything that gets a statue when the war is over. I'm a narrator, which is a polite way of saying I watch people make bad decisions and then explain them afterwards. In the Dominion, that makes me overqualified. In Sol, it makes me late. The Auric Rotunda of Vera Prime was a room designed by architects who distrusted shadows. Every surface gleamed with polished electrum. The ceiling was a vaulted fresco depicting victories so thoroughly retouched that even defeats looked triumphant. The acoustics amplified applause, dulled dissent, and treated warnings as if they were background noise. Archon Selvek sat on the throne of continuity, a piece of furniture with its own accounting line. He radiated the air of someone who had never been contradicted in public. His robe was stitched with golden filaments. Even his breathing looked ceremonial. The Council of High Banners surrounded him in tiers. Ministers in stiff collars, admirals gleaming with medals earned at safe distances, and nobles whose feather crests shimmered to indicate rank. The Varans, reptilian-avian hybrids, prided themselves on plumage displays. They molted only when convenient. At the chamber's floor stood Marshal Orvek, scarred, grey-scaled, one arm replaced by polished alloy. He had been summoned not for counsel, but for optics, a living relic, a veteran pulled from retirement to give a speech no one intended to hear. His scars caught the light like pale rivers. Selvek raised the baton of session, its jeweled tip catching every eye. "Marshal Orvek," he said, voice perfectly trained. "You have context. Speak on Earth." Orvek's voice was low and rough, worn by years of shouting commands across battlefields that never made it into parades. "You intend to march on Sol. You believe you face another colony, another weak people. You are wrong. What you intend to conquer has already survived worse than you." The chamber rippled with muffled laughter. Admiral Klein, medals gleaming like counterfeit stars, leaned deliberately toward his neighbor. "Primitives," he said in a tone calculated to carry. "Rockets, knives, perhaps pointed sticks. Our marshal here is sentimental." Orvek ignored him. "At the Karthik Drift, 30 humans intercepted a Dominion patrol 300 strong. We expected an execution. What we received was an education. They fought until their weapons broke, then fought with the fragments. They bled, but their advance did not stop. When the last fell, half of our patrol lay beside them." Gasps flickered across the lower seats. Klein rolled his eyes. Selvek leaned forward, voice crisp with dismissal. "You ask us to believe that savages, armed with improvised fleets and Stone Age tactics, threaten the Dominion. We have extinguished empires older than their cities." Orvek's prosthetic fingers clenched against the rail. "You mistake survival for savagery. Humans fight not for conquest, not for glory, but because extinction shadows them. They are relentless. Starve them, they turn hunger into weapons. Burn their homes, they build fortresses from the ruins. You may bury them under legions, but they will claw from beneath and drag you down with them." Derisive laughter echoed. A noble rose, his crest shaking with disdain. "Perhaps they frightened you, Marshal. Age makes men see ghosts." Orvek's patience cracked. His voice thundered through the chamber. "Numbers do not win wars. I commanded armies 10 times larger than rebels who nearly broke us. They had nothing left to lose. That is what you face now.
Earth will not kneel. They will fight until your fleets are wrecks and your soldiers beg for recall. For the briefest heartbeat, silence held. Even Selvek seemed unsettled, but his smile returned, smooth as ceremony. Inspiring, Marshal. But your time has passed. The Dominion cannot be halted by fables of desperate primitives. Earth's resources will fuel our growth. Their resistance will amuse our legions. Ministers nodded. Admirals smirked. Nobles adjusted feathers. The baton of session rose. Hollow slates ignited with blue light. Hands lifted, not a single one in dissent. The motion carried unanimously. Invade Sol. Orvek closed his eyes. He had heard this sound before, voices eager for war, blind to what awaited them. As the chamber roared in triumph, he turned toward the exit. Guards in ceremonial armor smirked at him as he passed. He ignored them. At the archway, beneath the words, "We end debates," he stopped. Without turning, he spoke softly, but his words carried across the rotunda. "You have no idea what waits for you in Sol." Then he walked into shadow.
The Dominion Armada assembled in orbit over Vera Prime. Dreadnoughts slid into alignment with mathematical arrogance, their hulls lacquered in gold and silver alloys. The flagship, the Radiant Edict, loomed at the center, a fortress of weaponry and ceremony. Around it, cruisers and carriers formed a wall of iron against the void. From the capital's plazas, citizens cheered. Propaganda drones broadcast speeches praising inevitable conquest. The Archon's words rang across every channel. We proceed, not in anger, but in administration. Earth shall be added to the Dominion. On the observation deck of the Oculus Prelate, Orvek stood with his hand against the glass. To others, the Armada was invincible. To him, it was a graveyard assembling itself. A young officer approached, posture ramrod straight, arrogance rehearsed. "Marshal Orvek, an honor. You'll see firsthand how swiftly primitives are dealt with." Orvek glanced at him. "You've never fought, have you?" "Top of my class," the officer said proudly. "Doctrine, logistics, post-victory governance." Orvek turned back to the fleet. "Classrooms don't bleed." Engines flared. The Armada slipped into faster than light, banners fluttering in a vacuum that did not care. During the journey, officers dined in lavish halls, toasting victory. Soldiers carved earth onto practice blades, trading bets on how long the campaign would last. In the corridors, laughter and certainty filled the air. Orvek walked among them like a ghost. He had seen this before, armies laughing on the way to a war they did not understand. Then Sol filled the viewports. The sun blazed like a furnace. Earth shone blue in the distance. Mars glimmered red, its moons circling like wary sentinels. Human defense satellites winked faintly, insignificant beside Dominion dreadnoughts. Admiral Klein leaned forward, lips curling. "Pathetic. They barely defend their home." Another admiral laughed. "We could sweep their orbit with one wing." Orvek's voice cut across the bridge. "They let you think that." Klein snapped. "Speak when spoken to, Relic." Orvek said nothing more. His warnings were finished. Now only blood would teach. The fleet spread into Earth's orbit. Human ships rose to meet them. Small craft, mismatched hulls, weapons glowing faintly. They looked like insects crawling to slaughter. "Signal them to surrender," Klein ordered. A human voice answered through static.
calm, steady. This is Sole Defense Command. Leave now, or fight for every meter. Laughter erupted across the bridge. Crush them, Klein sneered. Dominion cannons lit the void. Energy beams seared toward the fragile human fleet. For a moment, it seemed over. Then the trap sprang. Asteroids seeded with explosives detonated in the middle of Dominion formations. Mines hidden in orbital debris shredded cruisers from within. Wings of fighters vanished in fireballs before they could fire a shot. The bridge erupted in shouts. Reports screamed across channels. Ships listed and burned. Orvek watched calmly. They knew you'd underestimate them. Human ships darted through wreckage, crude but deadly. They used debris fields as shields, weapons aimed with merciless precision. Boarding pods slammed into Dominion cruisers. Within minutes, human soldiers stormed corridors, shotguns roaring, blades flashing. On the Oculus Prelate, officers shouted over each other. Deck 17 lost. Cruiser Breville breached. Marines overwhelmed. Klein slammed his fist. Savages. They dare invade our ships. Orvek's voice was level. Not savages. Survivors. The first day ended with Dominion wrecks burning in Earth's orbit. Dozens of ships lost. Human forces battered but unbroken. On the bridge, silence replaced arrogance. Admirals avoided Orvek's gaze. Selvic's hologram flickered into the chamber, his armor glowing even in projection. Losses are irrelevant. Double the assault. Burn their cradle to ash. As you command, Klein forced out. Orvek met Selvic's gaze. You are feeding soldiers into a fire that will not burn out. Selvic's expression hardened. The Dominion has no need of cowards' warnings. The hollow vanished. Orvek turned back to the burning crown of Earth.
Wreckage drifting like monuments. The war had only begun.
The sands of Mars did not care for ceremony. They remembered pressure, weight, and the bones buried beneath them. The Dominion legions landed in perfect formation, walkers stamping in time with the anthem that blared from orbit. From orbit, it looked like a flawless campaign beginning. On the ground, it unraveled almost immediately. Columns advancing across open plains found the Earth collapse beneath them. Walkers plunged into pits lined with explosives, collapsing into molten wreckage. Soldiers tried to retreat, only to find the ridgelines alive with hidden marksmen. Every officer who raised a hand to signal order was cut down within seconds. Klein barked at the reports. "How are colonists holding against legions of the Dominion?" Orvek replied without looking up. "Because they are not colonists. They are soldiers who never stopped fighting. Mars itself is their weapon." One canyon became infamous before the day was done. A Dominion regiment marched in, banners raised, vehicles rumbling. Explosions ripped the canyon walls, collapsing stone into fire. Missiles streaked from hidden shafts. When the dust cleared, the regiment was gone. Only broken armor and twisted banners remained. Survivors crawled back to lines, eyes hollow. A lieutenant's voice crackled across comms, shaking. "They're everywhere. We fire into the dust, and the dust shoots back. We lose squads, and when we return, the ground has replaced them with traps. We never find the bodies. Only graves we didn't dig." Klein snarled. "Cowards, hiding in dirt." Orvek's gaze sharpened. "Not cowards. Hunters. And you are prey that doesn't know it yet." On Earth, the campaign became even worse. Cities transformed overnight into fortresses. Towering high-rises became sniper nests, their windows spitting fire. Subway tunnels ferried soldiers unseen across districts. Entire neighborhoods erupted into ambushes, coordinated by signals Dominion officers could never intercept. Inside one transport, soldiers crouched as the streets above shook with explosions. One whispered, "How do they know where we move?" "They live here," another answered. "Every corner, every shadow, they've claimed it all." The hatch blew in. Terran soldiers stormed inside, shotguns roaring. The fight ended in seconds. Dominion after-action reports became grim jokes. Officers learned not to request casualty numbers. The silence told them more than figures could. Still, Klein clung to his illusions. "We outnumber them 100-1. Victory is inevitable." Orvek turned, eyes hard. "Numbers are nothing. Your reports tell the truth. Entire battalions swallowed by a handful of Terrans. Every time you tighten your grip, they slip free and cut deeper." "Your words sap morale," Klein snapped. "Reality does that," Orvek replied, dry as dust. The campaign ground on, but every step forward bled. The radiant edict hung above Earth like a verdict written in gold. Its spires were arguments. Its plaited hull was a promise. Inside, ceremony and command lived in the same rooms without getting along. The corridors had the quiet of a place that believes it will not be tested. When the human strike craft broke from the wreckage fields and stabbed for the flagship, the first alarms were polite. They were calibrated for drills, for exercises, for an officer to silence with a raised palm and a thin smile. The alarms grew less polite as the small craft kept coming. On Deck 31, a maintenance panel buckled outward with a sound like a swallowed cough. A breach charge blew the rest of the sentence away. Smoke rushed into the corridor, and through it came figures in scarred armor, moving with the compact, unshowy efficiency of people who have done this enough times to run out of adjectives. "Containment doors," a Veyron sergeant barked, already backing his squad into a triangular posture that looked tidy on a training holostage. The containment doors slid, then screamed on damaged teeth and stuck halfway. A human vaulted the gap, landed inside the triangle, and made geometry irrelevant. Gunfire in ships is intimate. There is nowhere for sound to leave. Shots are statements hammered into metal, into bone. The first Dominion line collapsed with more shock than noise. The second line held for 7 seconds, long enough for their officer to realize that the humans weren't advancing because the corridor told them to, but because the map in their heads did not include this corridor at all. On Deck 29, a young navigator clutched a bulkhead as reports overlapped until they were one long plea. 31 is gone. 30 is engaged. 29. She swallowed. They're on 29. They moved through the coolant spine. "The coolant spine is sealed," her superior said, reflexively, the way one says the sky is up. "Sir," she said, "it was sealed 5 minutes ago." On the command level, Archon Selvek stood beneath a flood of status panes, each demanding to be the most important sentence in the room. His armor caught the light and returned it in measured confidence. He pointed with the baton of session, as if walls obeyed that too. "Flood Deck 31. Close the ventilation arteries. Split Deck 30, and vent it if you must." "Vent contains our own squads," the internal security chief said. "Then the squads will move," Selvek said. "It is a question of motivation." The Oculus prelate tracked the flagship's telemetry like a physician trying not to say the word terminal. Marshal Orvek watched the breach indicators climb toward the center like red ants moving up a sleeve. The admirals around him kept their postures immaculate. It is important to look like a solution when one is actually a problem. On the Radiant Edict, Deck 28's central gallery was a long hallway designed for parades.
Human commandos traversed it in short, ugly motions that denied every camera its framing. A Veyron gunnery lieutenant, crest trembling, leaned into a wall mic. We are losing the gallery." A voice replied from Central Command, smooth as poured metal. "No, Lieutenant. You are transitioning the gallery to a different operational state. We are transitioning out of having it," the lieutenant whispered, then turned to his squad. "Hold here. If you must retreat, do it forwards." They tried. The humans came like a decision that had already been made. One of them took a round through the shoulder plate and did not alter stride except to change hands on the weapon. Another paused just long enough to pull a wounded comrade behind a protruding brace, slap a sealant patch on a gap in the suit, and point that comrade toward a different corridor with 2 fingers and a flat nod. They had a way of assigning tasks without speaking, as if speech had spent too many of their seconds in other rooms. Back in the sanctum, the Archon's court, officers, legal advisors, 2 ministers who had insisted their presence was symbolic, watched the same red dots as the rest of the ship. A legal advisor cleared his throat. "If I may."
"The precedent for evacuation?" Selvek's head turned slowly. "Precedent is the habit of those who expect to repeat themselves." "Sir," the security chief said, lower now, "we should move you to the procurator. Their shield envelope is intact." Selvek's chin lifted a fraction. "If I leave this room, this ship becomes a rumour. If I remain, it remains a fact." "Sir," the chief said again, because the form required it. "Send the praetors to hold the ribbon approach," Selvek said, indicating a passage that had decorative ribs arching over it like a crown. "This is a throne. Make it feel like one on deck 27, Dominion engineers clustered around a panel, vomiting sparks." "Cut the spine to the central column," their foreman ordered. "Starve them of air down that axis."
"Foreman," an assistant said, eyes glassy with feeds, "if we cut there, we cut life support to 3 decks of our own." "Do we have those decks?" the foreman asked. The assistant blinked, then reached for the lever. Corridor by corridor, the Radiant Edict discovered that human doctrine, so far as the ship could tell, was polite to nothing. The humans forced doors with charges, with crowbars, with a casual familiarity that made a mockery of sealed compartments. They took cover behind statues of Dominion heroes that had been commissioned to look invulnerable. They advanced across inlaid floors that had been designed to impress foreign dignitaries and now reflected blood in clean lines. On the Oculus Prelate, an admiral exhaled through his nose and found that air could carry grief and pride in the same movement. "If they reach the sanctum..." "They will," Orvek said. "And then?" the admiral whispered, as if asking for a bedtime story that could unhappen the world. "Then the ship stops being a building," Orvek said, "and becomes a camera." Another breach, another red bloom. The praetors took positions at the sanctum's approach, shields interlocked, ceremonial halberds replaced, reluctantly, with compact rifles. Their armor was the finest the Dominion could make, chased with gold leaf that caught the light in ways that made sponsors feel good about their contributions. They were stone in uniforms. The humans came around the last bend with discipline so quiet it was almost discourteous. The first shots shattered shields into glitter. The second shots took the front rank at hip height, driving them backward into the rank behind. The humans moved in a stagger that made it impossible to shoot the front. Every front was immediately someone's flank. "Seal! Seal!" a praetor captain shouted, his voice reaching for a command that would just briefly make time put down its tools.
A human slammed a shaped charge against the ribbed archway, turned away, and breathed once. The archway hiccuped, then tore, dropping a crown of fused metal across half the corridor. The humans shifted around the obstruction without drama, like water ignoring a line drawn across a river. "Close quarters!" the captain roared, and knives came out as if they were old friends. For 5 seconds, the corridor became a place where oxygen was a choice and steel was a language. Then it was over. The captain staggered back, blade in hand, staring down at it as if it had betrayed him by having limits. Inside the sanctum, Selvek stood alone in the center of the floor design. The Dominion's sigil, done in metals, originated from conquered worlds. He looked taller when he was still, and he had never been more still. The doors opened in a way that suggested the doors had not been consulted. The first human into the room swept left, then down, then right, motions small and contemptuous of flourish, as if the room had already failed some test. The human was running. 2 more entered. The rest fanned in, pausing exactly as long as it took to decide where to point and no longer. "Stand down," the security chief said, raising a hand. A human put a round through the chief's wrist and shoulder in the time it took the hand to reach the right altitude. Selvek lifted the ceremonial halberd, because tradition had always been heavier in his hands than iron. "You will not reach me," he said, and in his voice there was a kind of nakedness. "I am the Dominion." The frontmost human tilted his helmet a fraction, as if reading the title on a door before walking through. His visor was cracked in a white line that cut across where an eye would be. He spoke in a voice that could have been anyone's. "We didn't come for you. We came for everyone." He fired. Selvek folded slowly, the way a building leans before it understands it has forgotten how to stand. Armor plates shed like false teeth. He lay where he fell, some part of him still convinced that the optics could be improved. Across the flagship, systems disagreed about what they were supposed to do. Cameras sought directors. Record lines, damaged by the same concussive waves the humans had ridden through, took whatever they had and made it public. The Archon dying in his sanctum went out across Dominion channels without lower third graphics, without music, without commentary. It didn't need any. In the Auric Rotunda, a minister froze mid-anecdote. On Vera Prime's main plaza, a child asked his parent what it meant. The parent said it meant the feed had stuttered, then whispered a prayer to a god of fortunate errors. On the Oculus Prelate, an admiral's hands found each other without asking permission, and stayed that way. Klein sat down so fast his chair argued. He stared at the feed like it had broken him on purpose. "What happens now?" he asked, not to Orvek or the room, but to a story that had suddenly refused to continue.
Orvek watched Selvek's body remain where it was, the floor making a polite space around it as if to imply respect. "Now your ships remember that they are piloted by people," he said, "and people remember that they are allowed to stop." The radiant edict shuddered as power rerouted around holes that hadn't been on any draft. The humans withdrew not in triumph, but on schedule, dragging wounded with them in cruel, efficient harnesses. One commando, hit and limping, passed his weapon to a comrade without looking, and took up the rear security position with a pistol and a knife, both held like obligations. As they vanished, a young Veyron communicator who had spent a career making sure the right verbs connected with the right scenery whispered, "They were never here for conquest." "No," said the old petty officer beside him, whose crest had long since dulled into honesty. "They were here to make a point." The point had been made. It had required no more than what the Dominion had brought: a camera, a throne, and a man who believed himself to be a category. The flagship did not explode. It hung, wounded, a lantern of bad news, and the fleet surrounding it sagged as if its bones had rediscovered gravity. Orders went out. Counter-orders followed. Then came the quiet where neither seemed likely to be obeyed. "Retreat isn't authorized," Klein muttered, staring at nothing. "Authorization follows reality," Orvek said. "That is the best thing about it." He turned from the feed and looked at the fleet diagram, which now resembled a map of willingness rather than one of hardware. His voice was almost gentle. "Signal whoever will answer, break contact, and live to forget." For a long breath, no one moved. Then a junior officer, someone nobody had ever noticed except to praise punctuality, began to transmit the order. Above the blue arc of Earth, the radiant edict drifted, broadcasting nothing more. It had said everything it was going to say. Retreat began the way all true changes begin, at the edges, in whispers, and then all at once. Ships peeled away under the pretext of repositioning. Escorts became scouts, then strays, then absences. The fleet, so sculpted at departure, became uncomposed, a handful of hard, bright fragments falling back into the dark. On Mars, the wind wrote its long script across the plains and let the wreckage punctuate it. Dominion banners lay half-buried in red dust, their gold threads dull and honest at last. The survivors who had made it to the fallback points did what soldiers always do when the camera turns off. They took inventory of water, ammunition, friends. Marshal Orvek stood on the lip of a blasted outpost that had once been a communications relay and was now an idea about broken lines. Terran soldiers moved around him, small teams, voiceless except for hand signals and the occasional low murmur cut short by habit. Their armor was mismatched, their gear held together by decisions, their eyes the same in a way uniforms rarely manage. A human sat on a crate nearby, armor open at the throat to bleed off heat, face streaked in dust, hands steady as he threaded a new sling through a weapon that had belonged to someone who wasn't going to use it anymore. After a while, he looked up at Orvek, without any of the performative curiosity the Dominion expected from conquered peoples. "You're the one who warned them," he said, pronouncing it not as accusation or praise, but as a fact placed gently on a table. "I thought I was," Orvek said. "They thought I was noise." The human nodded once, the softest acceptance. "Then you understand us better than they do." "Would that help you any?" Orvek asked. "Helps me talk to you," the soldier said. He cinched the sling, tested it, set the rifle against his knee, and pulled a rag across the mechanism with a thoroughness that looked like prayer. Far below, a Terran squad ghosted across the open, every movement planned 3 steps past where they were. 2 covered, 2 moved, then the inverse, then all 4 vanished into a cut in the earth that had not been there last week. They reappeared minutes later on a ridge farther west. Orvek had commanded men for 50 years and had never grown tired of watching competence. A second human approached, helmet off, hair matted to the skull by dried sweat, eyes glass orange in the Martian light. "Marshal," she said, "we found 6 of yours still breathing in the lower galleries. They're scared, and they're angry, and they're bleeding. We patched them, handed them water, pointed them toward the beacon. They asked why we didn't finish the job." "What did you tell them?" Orvek asked. "That we're in a hurry," she said, and then smiled a little, the ghost of a thing with teeth, "and that we're not like them." "You're not," Orvek said. "You're worse, for anyone who thinks you're going to break." She looked past him, to the sky where the wounded points of light were slipping away from Sol. "We don't look for fights," she said, "but we file them when they arrive." He almost laughed.
You sound like my ministers. They speak in files too. We speak in chores, she said. Same structure. Different priorities. Another soldier jogged up, breath measured, voice lower than the situation warranted. Command says the orbitals are breaking off. We push the picket lines hard for 72 hours to make sure they don't change their minds. Then we go back to building the things they broke. And if they come back, Orvek asked. We'll still be building, the soldier said. They can interrupt again if they like. Orvek stood there until the wind picked up and put powder on his boots. He looked at these people who had withstood the worst kind of attention and decided not to do anything extraordinary with it, not to declare themselves anything besides alive. On my world, he said, they will hold hearings. They will measure failures by weight, and then they will lift the weight by redefining the unit. They will put up a plaque about listening. The first soldier looked amused in the way only the exhausted can afford. Put it near the door, he said. People see those. They will, Orvek said. They'll walk past it every day and forget why it felt heavy when it was installed. Then it will be part of the building, the soldier said. That's not nothing. He turned, raised 2 fingers to his squad, and disappeared into the low light, taking the conversation with him.
On Vera Prime, the auric rotunda dimmed by design and by habit. A new Archon stepped into the light that had never been turned off, his crest arranged for solemn responsibility, which is identical to ordinary responsibility, except for the cost. The council filled the tiers with the same bodies and slightly different expressions. The matter before us, the Minister of Expansion said, voice thin but upright, is not whether we are wise, because that is static, but whether we are learning, which is dynamic. The matter before us, the Minister of Morale said, is the story we tell our people. It must be true enough to work and simple enough to be remembered. The matter before us, said Admiral Klein, who had not slept and had found out that exhaustion does not make a man smaller so much as it reveals his exact size, is how to keep the next men we send from dying beside the last. A senator with a long memory, which is to say a good staff, rose. We should ask the one who warned us before we wrote the script. Let him speak. The rotunda made a noise it meant as consent. Orvek stood in the central well again, as if the days since his last appearance had been a short dream. He looked up at the faces that had dismissed him, at the banners that had been dusted after a funeral, at the throne now occupied by a man learning to hold the baton with fewer gestures. He did not bow. We lost because we made a category called primitive and put human in it, he said. We lost because we believed fleets win wars. Fleets begin wars. People decide them martial, the new Archon said, his voice careful and not yet his own. What must we do? Orvek shrugged, an old man's movement that encompassed the room. Stop staging outcomes in this hall and begin rehearsing humility. Find the officers who made the early calls to pull their squads back from collapsing corridors and promote them. Ask the last men off the line what they needed and give it to the first men on the next. And when someone says leave Sol alone, don't ask for footnotes. Ask for directions. Directions to where? The Minister of Finance asked before she remembered she was not here to speak yet. To the part of your mind that recognizes the shape of a teacher, Orvek said. You met one and you tried to grade it. Silence held in its mouth the taste of agreement. Would you go back? The Archon asked. To Sol, as our envoy, not to negotiate. To listen, Orvek considered the weight of that, the way a man considers if his hands can remain steady while carrying something other people will watch. I can go, he said, but they do not need me to listen.
They already have their own voices. We need it, the Archon said, soft enough to be a confession. Then I will bring you sentences, Orvek said, not the ones you want. The ones they use, the ship they gave him, was modest by Dominion standards and large by any sane metric. The crew saluted in the way people salute a man who isn't in their chain of command, but somehow is in the way they make their bed. As Vera Prime slid into distance, Orvek stood at the forward screen and watched how small certainty gets when you move away from it. He did not feel young. He felt current, which is better. Approach to Sol was less ceremonial than the Dominion had used the last time. There were no speeches. The Terran picket made no more threats. Orvek identified himself and his purpose, and the reply was a vector and a time. Earth filled the view, blue and obstinate, white and busy, green where it could be. Mars sat farther out, red and inward-looking. Wreckage still dirtied the orbits, small shadows of old mistakes. Tugs moved among them like caretakers. They brought him down in a craft that had killed many people before becoming diplomatic. The landing was functional. The welcome was not a welcome. A line of soldiers, relaxed to the exact degree of not wanting to argue. And beyond them, a city that was still a bruise and already a scar. A human led him into a room without banners. There were chairs that looked like they had never been arranged by anyone with opinions about posture. At the table sat 3 people, a man with a face like a closed fist, a woman whose eyes tracked every motion in the room with affectionless care, and a third who could have been anyone, and was therefore everyone. You warned them, the woman said, the way one says weather. Yes, Orvek said. They didn't listen, the man said. Correct, Orvek said. Now they sent you, the third said. They asked me to come, Orvek said. I chose to do it. They wished to understand what happened well enough to call it something else. The woman's mouth ticked, perhaps a cousin of a smile. That sounds like them. They would like to send materials, Orvek said. Food, medical supplies, tools. You want to put your label on rebuilding, the man said, and it would have sounded cruel if he had bothered to add any heat.
I want to ensure that what survives is workload, not debt, Orvek said. You will keep your own names on your own walls. We were going to, the third said. I assumed, Orvek said, and for the first time in a very long time, assumed felt like the right verb. Why are you really here, Marshal? The woman asked. Her voice said she knew the answer and wanted to hear him say it. To bring back sentences, Orvek said, so that when they begin the next speech, they start nearer the truth. What sentence do you want? The man asked. Orvek thought about the plaza on Vera Prime, about the child asking what it meant, about the parent explaining nothing and everything. He thought about the wind on Mars and the soldiers cleaning their weapons like tasks, not like identities. He thought about Selvek raising the halberd and making himself a noun. I want this one, he said. We defend what we are. If you come again, bring reasons, not banners. The woman nodded. You can have that. It's yours either way, Orvek said. I am borrowing it to pay back a debt. Debts are a bad word here, the third said. We prefer ledgers that close. Then close this one, Orvek said, and leave a note for the next person who thinks to open it. They sat with that for a moment. 3 humans, 1 Veyran, all of them tired of theatre. Then the woman stood, extended a hand in a gesture Orvek had never had to learn. He took it anyway, and learned it now. We'll send a message through your channels, she said. It will be shorter than you expect. Good, Orvek said. They lack patience for the right things. On the way back to his shuttle, Orvek passed workers raising a beam into place with a crane older than some officers he knew. The beam slid into position, and the crew set it down with small, gentle taps of hammers. A child watched from behind a sawhorse, counting quietly to 10 and starting again. Back on Vera Prime, the message went straight through corridors, still echoing with the old voice. It was 2 sentences long. People read it in kitchens and committee rooms, on trains and in bunk rooms, in the quiet just before giving an order, and in the quiet just after disobeying one. We defend what we are. If you come again, bring reasons, not banners. In the Auric Rotunda, the plaque by the side entrance was installed without ceremony. It was small and at eye height, where you saw it whether you meant to or not. It read, "To those who warned us, and to those who will." Someone had added, in a hand that would never be admitted to the record, "Listen when it's loud, listen harder when it's quiet." Klein stood before it late one night, uniform jacket unbuttoned, crest untended. He looked older in a way that wasn't about years. Orvek joined him without announcing himself. "They'll say I failed," Klein said. "You did," Orvek said. "We all did." "That's why the plaque is for plural. I told men to hold," Klein said. "Then I told them to run. I told them to come home, and some of them did not, and some of them will hate me for all 3 orders. They will be alive to decide which order to hate," Orvek said. "That is the best kind of hatred." Klein's laugh was small and unarmored. "I didn't know they could be like that," he said. He didn't need to say who they were. "You did," Orvek said. "You just didn't believe the knowing." Klein nodded, as if agreeing to carry something heavy for a while longer. "What will you do now?" "Write," Orvek said, "and ask for fewer statues." "Will you ask them to leave Sol alone?" "I won't have to," Orvek said. "They will ask themselves, and this time they will not answer in the rotunda first." The next week, the Fleet College added a module. It was titled, prosaically, Urban Entry and Egress Under Citizen Resistance, and less prosaically, When the City is Smarter Than You Are. The instructors left space on the syllabus for silence. The cadets did not enjoy that space, which was how Orvek knew it mattered. In a different wing, the Bureau of Procurement struck a line item from a dreadnought proposal, gold filigree, ceremonial, and replaced it with spare hull plates, not ceremonial. The clerk who made the change did not believe in poetry and had nonetheless written some. In the office of the Archon, the new man read the 2-sentence message each morning before any other briefing. It was not that he needed reminding. It was that habits become walls that keep your mind from wandering into old rooms. One evening, Orvek sat with a pen over paper and did something Vayrans do not often do. He allowed a page to remain mostly blank. He wrote a title, What Numbers Cannot Count, and beneath it he left space where the chapters ought to be. He had learned a new respect for the parts of a book made of white. He closed the cover, stood, and stepped out into a courtyard where the air smelled like rain that had forgotten its appointment. In the distance, a training ground's lights burned in straight rows. In the nearer distance, a janitor swept under the plaque and did not read it. Both were the correct actions at the correct time. At his shoulder, the evening made a space for one more sentence, and he put it there because it seemed rude not to. "Bring reasons," he said. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. The rotunda had learned how to hear the quiet parts. Above, the constellations reasserted themselves after weeks of being ignored for more immediate fires. Somewhere between them, the broken pieces of the old certainty drifted into the long archive where all certainties go. Soul turned unconcerned, and humans resumed their chores. The Dominion, chastened and intact, set about the work of being more precise than yesterday. It is not glorious work. It is the only kind that lasts. And somewhere, in a room without cameras, a small group of officers argued about labels, then put the argument down and began to plan.
So that's the record. Banners burned, fleets scattered, and humans who refused to kneel. History will pretend it learned something, though I doubt it will. If you'd like to hear the next set of mistakes dressed up as lessons, you know what to do. Subscribe. It's the only vote that actually counts.